Boy, it's nice having a warm-up act like that. Gee. I can also take pride in the fact that I am the only speaker at this conference who has video proof that I have the ear of God. So, respect my authority, please. Well, unfortunately, though, the tough part here is I'm coming off of Anthony Grayling, and he's talking about some of the same things I'm about to talk about, only, of course, he does it with a nice English accent. And he's got all this serious, high-minded stuff about philosophy and history and ethics and this deep knowledge of the subject. And I'm coming at it from the perspective of a rather blunt scientist. And what I'm going to tell you today is that science and religion are incompatible, simply, completely, irreconcilably incompatible. And I can give you the bottom line message in case anybody needs to leave, and that is that science and religion are incompatible in the same sense that the serious pursuit of knowledge about reality is incompatible with bullshit. Now, whenever I make these arguments, and if you read my blog, you know I've talked about this a few times. Whenever I make these arguments, I always get this same set of complaints. So before I get into my argument, I got to deal with this counter-argument that I constantly hear. Because what will always happen is that, well, I hate to put it this way, but there's always some wanker somewhere who will leap out of his seat when you say science and religion are incompatible, and they'll squeak out, "No, it's not true. I'm a scientist, and I go to church every Sunday." Or they will say something like they know somebody who is both a scientist and a Christian. Or they will cite famous people like Ken Miller and Francis Collins, who are definitely scientists and most definitely vocal Christians. And then I have to say, okay, sit down. I'm not disputing that. It's a waste of all of our time to make this argument. Anyone who advances that very silly argument ought to be deeply embarrassed. So what I'm doing right now is I'm being charitable, and this is to any of you squeaky wankers out there. All right? I'm forestalling your argument and encouraging you to avoid making an ass of yourself in the Q&A. Not that anyone would do that at this conference. So here's the problem with that argument. Let me tell you about Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader is definitely an evil man. I have no hesitation about using that word in reference to him. He's more notoriously known as the BTK Strangler. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. He's a serial killer, okay? He's murdered at least 10 people by torture. And he wrote these ghastly, gloating letters to the police, taunting them and bragging about these horrible crimes he'd committed. He's an unforgivable psychopath. There's just no arguing with that. And he's now, fortunately, locked away deep in a federal penitentiary where we all hope he will rot. But here's the thing, he's also a Christian. He was a devout member of the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, Kansas. He was there for 30 years. He was elected president of the Congregation Council, and he was also a Cub Scout leader. Which leads one to ask, is serial killing compatible with Christianity? Now, this is an audience of well-informed atheists, and so I imagine you're all mentally reviewing the historical evidence. The history of Christianity, picturing crusades, pogroms, all these kinds of atrocities, inquisitions, etc. And you're all thinking, yeah. But let's be charitable, okay? We'll be charitable here. Christianity has gradually moderated its intolerance over the years. Nowadays, it's not quite as rabid as it used to be. Which reminds me of the best definition of a new atheist I've ever heard. A new atheist is just any old atheist that the Catholic Church can't legally set on fire anymore. But I think honestly and seriously that we'd agree. Serial killing is incompatible with modern Christianity. It's incompatible with modern Christian thought. and also incompatible with the high-minded ideals of the religion. And I will agree that religion does have many high-minded, good ideals to it. The Christians, I'm sure, would also agree with me even more enthusiastically that Dennis Rader is not acting as an agent of Christian ideals. The fact that a few deranged individuals are Christian, or even that the majority of criminals in the United States, and I imagine in Australia too, are also Christian, does not mean that the philosophy and values of Christianity endorse criminality in any way. And I hasten to add, serial murder is probably also incompatible with being a good Cub Scout for the same reasons. Okay, but let me give you another example from a different angle. Kary Mullis is a very well-known scientist. He discovered PCR. And any of you who are scientists here know all about this. PCR is the polymerase chain reaction. It's a technique for rapidly amplifying known DNA sequences in a sample, and it was a brilliant insight, no doubt about it. PCR machines are ubiquitous in labs all around the world, and Mullis won a Nobel for this discovery. Unfortunately, he's also a certifiable kook. He wrote an autobiography called Dancing Naked in the Minefield, which I recommend highly if you want to read something that's entertaining in a trippy train wreck sort of way. It's that kind of book. Anyway, in this book, he talks about all these recreational drugs he takes, all about the women he's had sex with. He explains how HIV doesn't cause AIDS. Nowadays, he tours the country talking about how global climate change is not occurring. He also talked about how ESP is possible. And one afternoon, when he was playing with his computer, he proved that astrology actually works. It's all in the book. It's an amazing book. Now the question is Kary Mullis a scientist? And yes, definitely I would say he is. He has a Nobel Prize. You know, they can't get a much better badge of being a scientist than that. PCR was genuinely a great scientific discovery. Does that imply, though, that every thought that scampers through Mullis's well-doped brain is scientific? No, certainly not. Is astrology compatible with science because one scientist believes he has scientifically demonstrated it? No, I would say not. That what we've got here is a simple case of the fact that people are complicated. We are complicated animals. Our brains hold all kinds of false and contradictory ideals, and different people have different ideas. Imagine that. And those ideas have to be evaluated independently of the person holding them, or whatever other odd ideas are tumbling about in the grab bag of their cranium, except for mine, of course, which is perfectly pure. And as you will say, yours is too, I'm sure. When we try to claim that because so-and-so is a scientist, that every thought in his head must be automatically legitimate in the scientific sphere, we're making a glorified argument from authority. We are making a logical fallacy. There's plenty of room for each one of us to be wrong. Also, this defense of scientific compatibility, I've noticed, is always brought up to support religion and nothing else. If I tried to argue that my fondness for cheesy science fiction movies, like Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, okay? If I said because I like those, I have a good time watching them, they are therefore scientifically accurate and validated because I am a scientist, I don't think I'd get very far. I don't think you'd swallow that argument. You will not ever hear that argument from me, except as a joke. Now, religion, of course, is the mega shark of culture. It's basically improbable nonsense that tickles our brains in amusing ways, but it's unreliable. It's an outright falsehood in many ways, and it's often been falsified. And in addition, the CGI is really bad. Now, I have to add another qualification here. My complaint with religion isn't that it necessarily turns people into terrorists. I've often heard this argument. Religion doesn't make people fly into airplanes or fly airplanes into buildings, and it doesn't necessarily turn them into misogynistic tyrants, although, yes, I will agree, sometimes it does. I honestly believe from my experience that almost all religious people are good, decent, ordinary human beings, sharing many of the same values, such as love of family, a desire for economic stability, and a willingness to get along within their tribe at least, that almost all of us here in this room share. I actually think it's a huge tactical mistake for our movement to criticize religion on the basis of the pathological extremes, because most of the people we want to persuade in the follies of their beliefs don't see them as agents of the monstrous excesses of zealotry. The part of religion that makes it open to criticism, and which really makes it incompatible with science, is not that it makes you evil, it's that it's wrong and it makes you stupid. And to further this argument, what I would say is that, many of the religious apologists out there are not stupid people. They are often brilliant people working in the field of theology and philosophy, smart people everywhere. What they are, though, is the religious apologists, at least, are smart people who can build these amazingly intricate rationalizations for whatever weird practice they favor, whether it's ritual cannibalism, or praying to spirits, or treating women as chattel. And they always build this on this terrible shaky foundation of false premises. The justifications they construct can either lead to, for instance, institutionalized charity, which I think is a good thing. Religion has had some promising successes that way. But it can also lead to tribalism and holy war, which I think is generally a bad thing. And either one is about equally supported when your source of authority is an invisible man in the sky who whispers these inaudible orders into the brains of his priests. Okay, there's no way to evaluate which of those answers is the best. And that's my primary gripe with religion as a scientist. Not necessarily it makes good people do evil things, because I'm thinking I'm the kind of person who optimistically believes that most people are out to do good for their fellow human beings, and they use faith like a Ouija board to just express their desires. No, it's not because they're evil, it's because religion makes smart people do stupid things, and scientists do not like stupid. So I'm going to give you an example now, and this is an example of Ken Miller. Ken Miller is an American scientist. He's a cell biologist, and trust me, he's a really smart guy. Okay, I read his work. He knows what he's doing. He's also an excellent speaker, and he's been a very hardworking asset in combating creationism in the United States. I'm going to criticize the fellow very strongly here, but let me emphasize, I want Ken Miller to keep doing most of what he's been doing, because he is a real benefit to the cause of science education. And the reason I'm picking on him, rather than Ken Ham, who happens to be Australian, thank you very much. Yes, I appreciate the apologies. Ken Ham is an irredeemable moron, okay? So he's not a good example for my argument. On the other hand, Ken Ham is a good, smart scientist. And what I want to make a case for is that religion has poisoned his brain and made him think some very, very stupid things. That's the danger of religion. Okay, here's a specific example. So Ken Miller is a biologist. He's familiar with the evidence for evolution, and fortunately, Catholicism has no official complaint with evolution, because Ken Miller is a Catholic. He keeps on telling us he's a Catholic. It's part of his shtick, okay? So Catholicism has no official complaint with evolution, and much of Miller's popular writings are all about why evolution is a fact, and he's very good at knocking down the follies of creation. See, he's a smart guy. But then the problem with his writings emerge whenever he has to try and reconcile evolution, which is an impersonal force with some rather heartless and cruel implications, with his Catholic belief in a loving God who intentionally created us. There is absolutely no scientific evidence for such a being. There is no evidence that we are the product of anything but chance funneled through the filter of natural selection. And Miller knows this. He knows there is no scientific evidence for his beliefs. So he had to invent a loophole. He had to invent this contrived little excuse to wedge his God somewhere in the whole process of evolution. And he does it in a way that excuses the absence of evidence. So he makes what he likes to call explicitly scientific arguments that God is found in a process called quantum indeterminacy. Okay? That is because that is that the behavior of subatomic particles is not fully predictable. There's a lot of slop in the behavior of what these things do at a very tiny level of the universe. And what Miller likes to claim is that God can intervene in subtle, undetectable ways. God is playing with loaded dice, and he's really good at putting in a fair set of dice whenever we try to scrutinize the process. So basically he's saying God cheats at physics. And of course the operative word here is undetectable. He's saying you cannot see this. Now I have to cite a real authority here, Terry Pratchett. Who once said, "Let's call it quantum is not an explanation." Now, can I disprove his assertion? No, Miller has carefully crafted his explanation to be completely untestable. And as anyone with even a passing familiarity with science can tell you, untestable explanations with no supporting evidence at all are not scientific. They're what we call in technical terms bullshit. It's an entirely religious argument. And I'm using that word in the same sense as saying it's a really stupid argument. For one thing, you have to ask, okay, how does Ken Miller know that his God worked by nudging an occasional cosmic ray into bumping into a particular nucleotide in the DNA of our ancestors? Because I know no one has seen that. And he's even admitted there's no evidence for this. It's unobservable. You can't detect this. The entire point of this exercise is to invent a way for God to do something without ever doing anything. So how does he know this? Well, he doesn't. And what it seems like is that Miller hasn't read what should be everyone's source book for the basic principles of critical thinking. And by that I mean, everyone probably knows this already, Carl Sagan's book, The Demon-Haunted World, Science is a Candle in the Dark. I strongly recommend that Miller should read the chapter titled, The Dragon in My Garage. Does anyone know this one? Are you familiar with this? Yes, of course. It's precisely the story that Miller is telling us, without any quantum, of course. If you haven't read it already, though, run out and buy it. It's marvelous. This is one of the best books you can read if you want to learn about how to think like a scientist. But to summarize it, he's telling a little fable about keeping a fire-breathing dragon in his garage, except that it's invisible and it floats so it doesn't leave tracks, and its fire is heatless, and it's not corporeal, so you can't touch it. It's a lot like God, constantly being removed from the realm of reality as people pursue it. And Sagan's conclusion is the smart one. It's how we should treat God and how we should treat Miller's little quantum story, in that the only sensible approach is tentatively to reject the dragon hypothesis, to be open to future physical data, and to wonder what the cause might be that so many apparently sane and sober people share the same strange delusion. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it does. Now, I'm not through with Miller just yet, though. In a recent magazine interview, he compounded the stupidity of his explanation in a way my jaw just dropped when I read this. He's got an excuse for this quantum indeterminacy thing. He says, this sort of sly intervention, he argues, is vital to the Creator's project. Again, he must know the Creator's project somehow, but he doesn't tell us how. If God were to regrow limbs for amputees, for instance, if God were to perform the sort of miracles demanded by atheists as proof of his existence, the consequences would be disastrous. Okay, I'll warn you, the disastrous consequences aren't for the amputee, who would probably be very grateful. They are disastrous for the Catholic Church. Suppose that it was common knowledge that if you were a righteous person and of great faith and prayed deeply, all of a sudden your limb would grow back, he says. That would reduce God to a kind of supernatural force, and by pushing the button labeled prayer, you could accomplish anything you wanted. So far sounds great, okay? But he asks, what would that do to moral independence? This is the disastrous consequence, that having access to something that would make something powerful and useful might make us morally compromised. Apparently, Ken Miller does not use a washing machine and dryer. It leaves one a little breathless. As I said, Ken Miller is a scientist, and he's a smart fellow, but this is what religion does to him. It leads him to make ridiculous leaps of illogic. His argument for why God doesn't heal amputees also reveals that he hasn't read another important work in the scientific literature. I speak, of course, of Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm sure most of you recognize Miller's argument as simply the Babelfish story. So the Babelfish is this incredibly improbable organism, a small fish that you can stick in your ear, which uses telepathy to act as a universal translator. And here's what Adams says about it. Now, it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance, that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes like this. I refuse to prove that I exist, says God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. But, says man, the Babelfish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have evolved by chance. It proves you exist, and so therefore, by your own arguments, you don't. QED. Oh dear, says God, I hadn't thought of that, and promptly disappears in a puff of logic. Now, according to Ken Miller, then, there are no human amputees receiving miraculous recoveries at Lourdes for the same reason there isn't actually a Babelfish. Because if God actually did something useful, it would prove he doesn't exist. This is a God so powerful, so awesome, that he refuses to be bounded by the arbitrary requirement of making a goddamn difference in the world. Now, I have a couple of other problems with Miller's argument. Once upon a time, I did research on amphibian regeneration. You can take a newt and snip off a whole leg with a pair of scissors. Great fun in the labs. And you wait a few weeks to months, and it grows back. It's perfectly functional. It's normal. It's hard to tell it apart from the undisturbed limbs. I've done this a whole bunch of times, and I've never noticed that I was disproving God all that time. But I'm wondering now, perhaps that's why I'm an atheist. And all I have to do is get Miller into a newt lab, and we will be able to get him on our side, too. Of course, there are other alternatives to that interpretation of the experiment. It may be that God just loves newts more than he does us. Or another horrifying possibility is that perhaps newt wish fulfillment has destroyed their moral independence. So clearly, we need to do more research. And of course, the other peculiar thing about Miller's argument that God works indetectably, that he can't be too obvious about the miracle making because he might undermine faith, is that he's a Catholic. He believes that God turned into a man and wandered around the Middle East turning water into wine, walking on water, curing leprosy, and raising the dead, which I think is much more impressive than growing back a limb. And doesn't that make God a supernatural force right there? If only God could vanish in a puff of logic, we'd be all done here. But he doesn't. And why? It's because the human mind is a product of evolution. It's an assortment of shortcuts and other utilitarian routines that are just good enough to allow us to survive and thrive. The mind is an engine that evolved to help us eat and avoid being eaten, to mostly keep us functioning cooperatively with other members of our tribe. It is not a remorseless engine of flawless logic. We will, for instance, accept all kinds of incredible nonsense if it will get us laid. And you all know this. What science is it's a process that helps us overcome the shortcomings of our minds. These are sloppy operations going on in our head, and what they are is a set of checks that allow us to operate more efficiently, more logically, when we're carrying out important actions. Well, maybe not as important as getting laid, but important actions that help us understand the world around us. They're not necessarily, so what we've got here is a world that is often counterintuitive to our brains, and we need a method to overcome the biases that we have, and that's science. Richard Feynman had this excellent short description of what science actually is. It's a one-liner. You should memorize it. Science is what we do to keep from lying to ourselves. It's a way of thinking in which we're constantly aware that we could be wrong in our preconceptions, and so continually define new tests of our ideas. It's a way of breaking out of the faulty modes and models that evolution has granted us. On the other hand, of course, religions are the lies we tell ourselves to justify our biases. Rationalizations, which is all that religion can generate, do not represent new knowledge. At best, religion generates comforting noises to mask the fact that someone is starving to death, or is dying of cholera, or has had a crusader stick a sword in his chest. That is all it has accomplished in the millennia of its history. It has not improved our ability to grow food or treat disease, nor has it given us any new insights into our origins and existence. You would think that an omnipotent God, when dictating his holy book to his prophets, could have thrown in a few good, surprisingly accurate suggestions that would have shown that he actually knows a little bit more than the goat herders he was talking to. For instance, Jehovah gives us an account of the history of his creation in Genesis. It's only about a page and a half long. And okay, I will grant that maybe Iron Age goat herders have short attention spans, so you can't go on and on at length. It's also it's a bit repetitive, it's very poetic. It also gets everything completely wrong. If God had written it, why couldn't this all-knowing being have dispensed with the metaphor and poetry for one little short paragraph and written something like this as the first bit of Genesis? As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as consequently there is frequently recurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate in its new and modified form. That's brilliant. It's not just brilliant, it's beautifully expressed, and it's short, and it doesn't use any jargon. You know, maybe if they translated it in the right language, I don't see why some Mesopotamian goat herder couldn't have appreciated it. Or at the very least, you know, it would have made him think. And he could have sat there and contemplated it, and he might have started thinking about, well, let's do some experiments with the goats. Instead, the human race had to wait until 1859 when Charles Darwin wrote those beautiful words. To actually learn something deep and profound about the process that creates biological diversity, why couldn't we have gotten that little hint in the book of Genesis? I'd be a Catholic now. Okay, or if you think evolution would be a little bit too deep for these Iron Age goat herds, God could have at least told them, wash your hands. 3 words. A very basic, useful bit of hygienic information. It would have saved many lives. We had to wait until the 19th century for doctors to figure this out. Instead, we've got a Bible that gives detailed orders to snip off the ends of our penises. I think that should win a prize for the most useless piece of medical advice ever. Okay, but this is the key point. What has most improved human life in the last few centuries? New technologies generated by this recently discovered process called science, which genuinely is a powerful way of knowing that really does generate lots of new knowledge. It is directly in opposition to religion as a way of knowing. Faith is not information. Belief is not sufficient to probe the universe. It is antithetical to critical examination and honest understanding. Adding the taint of religion to science does not complement our knowledge, never has to date anyway. And given that every example of religious apologetics combined with science that I've seen so far, from Ken Miller to Francis Collins to the BioLogos site to the fantasies of the Templeton Foundation, it's merely cluttered up our understanding with nuggets of pointless myth that eventually have to be tediously extracted. I don't see that religion will ever contribute to science. So science and religion are incompatible in all the ways that count. Science works, religion doesn't. Science will not allow the divine foot in the door, as Lewontin has said, because religion corrupts and misleads. Thank you.
I'm going to take some privilege here and ask PZ my own question here. Can you tell us about this tie?
No. Oh, okay. Yes, everybody asks about my tie. It's a crocoduck tie. Oh, we have no video. Okay. I'm flapping it. But, no, it's a crocoduck tie. Richard.
No.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. There we go. See, okay. Watch Richard Dawkins tomorrow. He may be wearing one too. If he does, you won't be able to tell us apart.
Okay. Gentleman down the front here.
Hi, PZ. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the talk. Matt Jacob from Perth and University of Western Australia. Nice to know I'm not alone. I guess the question, it's kind of the nature of our lack of belief that we always seem to come across headstrong creationists and Christians and religious people that are kind of immovable to any sort of logical debate or argument. It's as fun as it is getting in these long, drawn-out debates with them. Do you think that we should actually get involved in these sorts of things, and because it kind of seems as though we're wasting our time with the kind of people that have what I call a baseless passion? Feels like we're not getting anywhere. Or should we just sort of take a starting point of, hey guys, the debate's over. We kind of have a good idea of where we're at now. Now let's move on with things. What are your thoughts on that?
The debate really is over. Creationism is false. It's that simple. I would say that if you're talking about a formal debate, I definitely say don't do it. It's a waste of time. I did one just this fall that sort of clinched it for me, in that the guy I was debating turned into a total raving lunatic. He waited about 30 seconds into his talk before he blew his top. But anyway, so it was a total waste of time, so I agree there. And all you're doing is giving them unwarranted respect if you give them a place on the podium with you. Okay, but let me add a but to that, and that is one-on-one, do it. That what you can often do is make an argument face-to-face that, they can't run away from you, and they'll actually have to listen to you, and you'll have to listen to them, and you can get a good conversation going. And what I found is often very useful in these kinds of discussions is that you learn why this guy is such a nutcase about creationism. And you learn what he's really concerned about. And the most common thing I've learned when I sit down one-on-one with a creationist is that the number one thing they're concerned about is that their children will go to hell if they listen to me. And, that kind of resonates. I wouldn't want my children to go to hell either. It's why I raised them as atheists. But you can appreciate and understand where they're coming from a little better. And often in these one-on-one discussions, you have a more sincere meeting of the minds, and you can appreciate what they're doing. And I can do things to reassure them, like I tell them, I teach biology, and in my biology class, I don't say that there is no God, and I don't tell them that you have to be an atheist to be a scientist, and I can reassure him that he can send his kids to my class, and they'll just learn the facts, and he can poison their minds with all the other crap on his spare time, but I'll teach them the stuff that they need to know to get through college and get a career. And that makes them happy.
Okay, the second row here.
Thank you. My name's Rob, I'm from Melbourne. I completely agree with you about, in the modern sense, science and religion being incompatible. But I'd just like to take everything back to get your own comment on in the very ancient, very first days before we had any sort of established science. I'm talking very, very ancient, just tribalism. Some people would say that there was a role for religion, as in someone might have worked out it is best to plant the wheat on the 4th of July. But no one would follow them. No one would actually do it. So what they did is they got a religion together so that everyone would follow it, and they actually would plant the wheat on the 4th of July. Do you sort of get the point I'm getting at?
Yeah,
Okay.
that they're using religion as kind of the carrot and stick to get them to do something sensible. The problem with that argument is how did this religious guy know what was the best date? I suspect that what was happening is that he was listening to the farmers, the people who were doing the planting.
I'm saying it's the same guy originally, perhaps. That the scientists got really pissed off that no one would listen and remember the next year to plan on the 4th of July.
Well,
and he got sick of no one listening to him.
It seems a little far-fetched to me, because I think, if I were in that tribe, I would find it far more persuasive when the farmer brings in the bumper crop of wheat every year. That's what I'd be looking for. Is you feed your family really well. What are you doing to do this? And I will do this too. I would also say that in these tribes where religion was operating, there were the guys who were sitting there figuring out how to knap flint and make really sharp knives, the scientists, and then there were the guys making little wooden dolls and sticking pins in them, the religious people, and guess which one worked? So yeah, I think religion has been parasitizing all along. You might be able to find some contrived instances where you could make an argument, well, yeah, maybe they got this going in this particular way. It might actually be a better argument to say, for instance, in the floodplain societies where religion was an organizing factor that helped them put together irrigations that could increase yields. Yeah, there's arguments you could make there, but sure, I'm more interested in the irrigation engineers than the priests who made up stories about it.
Okay, thank you.
The top row upstairs. Here we go.
Hi, PZ. Hear me? Hi, PZ. I'm Doro from Brisbane.
Okay. I have no idea where your voice is coming from, but just go ahead. Talk to me.
Way here.
Way up there. Okay.
Okay. Your
I was worried you were
profession.
God or something.
Your profession is based on analysing evidence, facts, truth. The people that attack you and vilify you and demonise you, at best, are misinformed. At worst, make up shit. Really.
Yeah.
Their arguments are based on lies. Given that nearly half the American population believes the lies and does not accept the truth of evolution, does that make you despair, or does it make you resolve to try and educate people more?
Yeah, I get paid for teaching people. So, I have an expanding career for the rest of my life. But, no, I don't despair, because I see promise in the future. That what I'm seeing right now is look at this room. You people are willing to learn. What I'm finding is, all across the United States, and I'm sure all across this country too, is that we're seeing more and more of these student groups forming. There are more and more people who are getting vocal about rejecting the old superstitions of the past. And I think that is the first step that needs to be taken to improving that horrible 40 to 50% number. Is let's get rid of the dogma, and let's get people who with open minds who are willing to learn the evidence, and I think those numbers will improve. And I think we can credit the atheist movement for it.
The first row, down there. Yep.
Hi.
Hi?
My first comment was just a little story about a month ago. I enrolled my daughter in preschool and I was asked 3 questions. The first was, did I have a copy of her birth certificate? The second was she immunised? And the third was, does she have a religion? She's 2.5. And I was asked if she had a religion so they could accommodate that. That leads into my question, I guess, which is about the fact that in Australia, it's pretty commonly accepted that evolution is the truth. And yet, in a lot of schools, public as well, but universally in the private schools, creationism is taught, intelligent design is taught in biology classes by biology teachers.
Yeah? This sounds just like America. Now you're motivated to do something about it, aren't you?
That's my question. Why aren't more biologists and scientists talking about this? We always hear about the religious people and their opinions about their right to teach it. Why don't we hear more about scientists' right to teach only the truth in education?
It's a good question. And it's actually a common problem that I run into all the time, that this is a one-way argument. That if you go into the public schools and you talk to the teachers, what you'll discover is that they're terrified to teach evolution, because when they do, parents will storm in and yell at them and tell them they're going to hell, et cetera, and don't teach my children this, don't poison their minds. When teachers teach evolution, how many of you, when your kids are taught evolution, go in and tell the teacher, good job, you've done something great? It doesn't happen. It's really rare. So all the feedback is going one way. It's all negative against teaching what they should be teaching, because we all take it for granted that our science teachers are doing a good job. So what we need to do is stop taking it for granted. Talk to the teachers, tell them what they're doing right, and when you've got teachers that are doing something really wrong, kick their ass and get them fired. We hope.
Okay, the second microphone there in the middle. Yep.
Hi, PZ. It's Ben from Melbourne. Now, as you've mentioned, you've got an expanding career. You're a research scientist, a university lecturer, amateur actor, as we can see from Mr. Deity.
Wait, amateur? What?
Oh, so that's why he needs the begging clips at the end of each episode. Okay. And also blogger with Pharyngula. Now, with that, Pharyngula goes out to an audience of millions over the course of a year, I'm sure. As a research scientist, your work is read by, I assume, thousands of researchers.
Tens.
Sorry? Tens, yeah. Okay, and as a lecturer, you would, I assume, have a couple of hundred students a year.
Yeah.
Which one of those roles do you think is the most important in terms of teaching science and in promoting reason?
I'm at a teaching university, and I can tell you that when I go out for promotion and tenure review and things like that, number one is teaching the students at the university, because that pays the bills. Number two is the research I do, because that also helps pay the bills. And a very distant third is the blogging stuff, the outreach. That those of you who have academic careers, you've probably heard of the holy trinity of teaching, research, and service. Those are the 3 things we're evaluated on. And things like public outreach is always in service, and it's the lowliest of the 3.
That may be for the college, but what
that's
about
for the college.
You? What about for you?
That's a tough one. I mean, I love taking little baby zebrafish apart.
And of course, snipping
there's
the
nothing
legs
like-
off newts as well, yeah.
You know, I get up in the morning and I squeeze fish and I get a couple hundred embryos and I do horrible, evil experiments on them, which is the good life. But I also really enjoy teaching my students. And you know, if you'd talked to me 10 years ago, I said, those are the two things I do all the time. That's all I will be doing, ever, until I die. And this blogging thing just came out of nowhere. I just started typing on this thing called a computer and throwing things on this other thing called the World Wide Web, and people started reading it. And it's been a very spontaneous and weird and enlightening surprise. What's rewarding most about it is not necessarily that I'm talking to people and reaching out to them, but that there's this huge audience of people out there in the world who are craving information and want to hear this stuff. And that's another of those things that gives me a lot of hope for the future, is that there are people like you who want to learn. And we've got these new technologies that are allowing us to do that ever more efficiently. So I can't say which of those three is my favorite. I like them all. It's why I'm in this career.
The top row, up there.
Hi, I'm Matt from Melbourne. I was just wondering if you didn't know during the week, some of our universities around Melbourne got invaded by a certain group called Living Waters, giving out some certain books with a special introduction by Ray Comfort. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the fact that he was able to, in a way, co-opt the work of Darwin, The Origin of Species, introduce obviously a half plagiarized, half ridiculous introduction of his own writing, and then hand that out as some kind of token of good faith or whatever he passed it off as.
Okay, you're trying to coax me into using a long string of profanity, aren't you? No, Ray Comfort is a dishonest, lying sleazebag. I mean, he is the worst. You know, it's not just that he used Charles Darwin's words to promote a point of view that is unsupported by the evidence and is completely contrary to what Charles Darwin said, but he did it incompetently. If you've read the introduction to that, it's horrible. And it's also plagiarized. The guy is such an intellectual lightweight, he couldn't even write his own essay. What he did is he stole a nice autobiography or nice biography of Darwin that was on the web, and then he went fishing through creationist sites and pulled up paragraphs here and there and spliced them all together in this ghastly mishmash. It's disgraceful. You know, I don't know how Ray Comfort gets up in the morning and looks in the mirror. It's that bad. Yeah. What's that? He's a Kiwi? Oh, yeah.
No, apparently he eats kittens, was the comment?
I thought that's what we did.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Ray Comfort is a New Zealander, so that's another strike. Just like Ken Ham. Okay, I got to mention him a few times. Thank you.
One more from the middle.
David from Perth. You mentioned before about the charitable work that religions do, and then that's a good thing and so on. But I've always wondered, you know, would McDonald's fund Ronald McDonald Charities if they didn't get a PR payoff from it? And do you have any thoughts on religion's true motivations behind their charitable work?
Oh, well, I was trying to be nice. Come on. But no, I agree that it's basically a selfish endeavor. That we heard an earlier talk about the economics of religion, and the reason they are doing this is to put up a nice pretense of being a charitable organization so you can get the nice tax cuts and get treated as a privileged institution. So I think that's ultimately what a lot of it is. And then the other part of it, the part that's been around the longest, is that these charitable efforts are always tied to proselytizing. This is an evangelical movement. You know, do we really want to buy friends? Well, Christianity does, but we'll aim a little higher, and I think what we offer is truth rather than a Bible. Okay.
All right, well, that's it. We're breaking now, and we'll see you in an hour for dinner. Thank you.